Holla ballers, what's going on? It's Preacher, and we've had some developer interviews coming in, and one of the big notices is various notes were put out about Warlords of Draenor, about what's going to be happening, some changes to loots and whatnot, but the big thing people are really concerned about and bringing up to me is this: you need to do the Proving Grounds now in order to enter heroic dungeons. Interesting idea. Couple of pros, couple of cons, so we're going to get a little debate going. You guys can chip in and give your opinion on it. Initially, you might think, that's just annoying. Which, for a lot of players who are reasonably decent, which is the majority of the people on this channel, obviously, most of you came here for guides originally, in which case I assume your gameplay is actually pretty tip-top by these days. So we've got to say that for you guys, it's probably just an annoyance. It's like, why? I could do a heroic dungeon in well below the gear you set for me for fucking LFD. Why the shit would I need to do a Proving Ground before I get into a heroic? I agree with that. Whenever these sort of... it's an attunement. That's what it is. It's an attunement, right? We can't really get away from the idea that you are now attuning yourself to heroic dungeons by doing these Proving Grounds. We have talked many times about the fact that we're band-aiding World of Warcraft right now because of the degradation to the will of the player base to get better over the last two expansions. And I choose my words carefully there because that's what it is. It's a degradation in the will to get better. Players haven't had to, haven't needed to, and therefore haven't wanted to sort of get to a level that we would consider sort of a minimum standard even, let alone a high standard, in order to progress and see all the content in the game. So we've got to start repairing that. One of the things that they've brought in was Flex. That's doing well. People are starting to realize that it's so much more efficient. And in fact, when you're in an organized group of somebody leading, it's actually easier than LFR. And now we're seeing this sort of return to an old style idea of attunements. The last time we saw attunements for heroic dungeons was the Burning Crusade. I have to say, in comparison to what we had to do in the Burning Crusade, this is actually incredibly easy. If you don't remember, I believe initially you had to get revered with each faction. I'm pretty sure it was revered. It could have been honored, and you can call me up on that one. Get revered or honored with each faction to access its heroic dungeons. So Alkendown, for example, you had to get revered with Lower City in order to do things like I'm going to forget, the Hellfire Peninsula dungeons. You had to get revered with Hellfire Peninsula, and so on and so forth. And I believe the same with the Netherstorm in order to enter the actual Nether instances there, the Alcatraz and whatnot. So a real interesting idea that we're moving back towards attunements. Now, there is a couple of good things that can come from this. One, it's a first step towards ensuring that the people who are in your heroic dungeons have some kind of idea of how to play. We hope. One of the big questions we have to ask is, how difficult are the Proving Grounds going to be? Are they going to be any good or not? They say they're going to be updated and expanded. Does that mean that they're now more of actually doing a sort of proxy 5-man where we'll be using 4 bots in some fashion, and we'll have to tank a dungeon for 4 bot characters? How well will that be implemented, designed? Or will we be once again enclosed in a sort of sealed off room where we just have to either interrupt or DPS mobs? One thing we can say, if we base it off the current Proving Grounds, is that things like interrupts and dispels do need to take place, otherwise they're not actually able to get a gold medal. You need to be able to do those things. Another aspect of this that we kind of need to worry about is, are they going to be more difficult for certain specs and classes? Like we have seen with the current Proving Grounds, is they needed to be rebalanced. You remember I went on the beta servers for the Proving Grounds and actually did the gold medals on all 3 roles. And for some classes, it was considerably more difficult. It's been rebalanced and reworked a little bit now. But in the initial implementation and during this race for gear, which is the big part of a new expansion, is we want to get our heroics and our blues out of the way so we can start jumping into the new raiding system. Is this going to be a case of, you know, for a Moonkin or even a Feral Cat, that this is actually really difficult? Can I get a gold medal in anything? Is the tanking one very easy so I can switch over to Guardian and do that? How does that help me in ensuring that I'm pretty good as a DPSer? What if tanking or healing is so incredibly simple that the people who this is supposed to help, which are the players who haven't had to do these things, actually go in as a different role that they won't be playing in our 5-man dungeons, and therefore the system is broken and doesn't work and isn't actually giving us the results we're actually after? So that's a big, big question mark over the top of this. The good side, and there is a good side to this, is does this mean, and again, this is all theoretical at this point, we have to bear that in mind, but does this mean that we're going to see a return to difficult 5-man heroics. Are we putting this roadblock in front of things because once they get into the 5-man heroics, they're not going to be what we had in Cataclysm and what we had in Mists of Pandaria, which were glorified normal modes. You remember in Mists of Pandaria, there was no normal modes once we hit level 90. It went straight to just being heroic. The idea of, like, if we go back to Kata, where it had Grimbatol normal, once you hit level 85, and then, of course, you had Grimbatol heroic on top of it. Is this going to now change back to, again, a more the Burning Crusade style of things? Are they actually sort of pointing us in the direction as we're going back to a kind of Burning Crusade model? As much as people say they want easier, more casual content, we don't believe that's actually good for the game, and the numbers suggest that when the game was actually considerably more difficult, as it was in the Burning Crusade, is we actually saw a rise in subs because people had challenge, they had reason to log in and try and do things. All that kind of aspects of the game was actually quite a major part of it, okay? So the Burning Crusade is much more difficult. So instead of players logging in and smashing through content and then going, well, I've got nothing else to do now, time to unsubscribe until the next major content patch, are Blizzard now thinking to themselves, let's make it harder again. Let's make it harder again and just see what happens. Let's give people this kind of gentle way in. We're not asking people to go out and farm massive amounts of dailies. I can't see us doing the mistake again like we saw in Mists of Pandaria, which is when people capped is, oh, okay, here's like 5 or 6 factions that you have to get exalted with in order to get some reasonable rewards. Are we not going to see that again, are we? They're not going to make that mistake because the instantaneous reaction of the casual, which is the majority of the player base, was to switch off. I don't want to do that kind of content. I really don't want to do so many dailies on a regular basis, but that is the only content left to me because doing things like 5-mans and whatnot is actually incredibly simple, and I've smashed through them already. And then later in the game we got the challenge modes, but people had kind of lost interest. The challenge modes were already great for the people who were already doing tougher content. But of course that didn't cater to those people who just don't give a shit about that stuff. They just want to do their LFRs and whatnot. I will say we kind of dabbled in this in Kata, didn't we? We did dabble in having more difficult 5-man heroics. I definitely think about things like Stonecore Heroic, which for the vast majority of the expansion, people were still wiping on pretty hardcore. Really wiping on that pretty hardcore. It didn't go over too well. Was that too big of a jump? Was it a case of you came from things like Wrath of the Lich King, which was, you know, notoriously easy. You were finishing dungeons like Ajal Narub in a matter of minutes, like 4 or 5 minutes you could clear that dungeon, and then you threw them into something like the Stonecore Heroic, and even Grimbatol Heroic. Some of those bosses, especially the last one, which needed something simple like an interrupt and not to stand in a giant shadowy area, that actually caused a great amount of problems for a lot of people, and people just could not handle it. And they didn't like it, and people were complaining, the forums were exploded with, oh, this is too difficult, what the fuck? And basically you were hitting them in the face with a sledgehammer. We have to be a little bit careful, because I'm all for this repairing the player base that needs to happen. For many of you, you'll be just thinking this is just an inconvenience. If it is an inconvenience to you, kind of look at it as a very simple inconvenience, because that's all it is. It's not an inconvenience that's going to put you back. It's still an inconvenience. There's no doubt about that whatsoever. Many of you out there, especially the longer term players, don't need to be told how to dispel, and you certainly don't need to go to a proving ground and learn how to dispel, how to heal people, how to interrupt, because you do it second nature. You've been following my videos where I'm telling you that, you know, fucking interrupting and purging is one of the most important spells on your bars. Get used to using it, and therefore this kind of stuff is just going to seem trivial to you. If you are in that position, and I hope you are, understand that there are many, many more people who are not in that position. We still see, even now, you can go into the Temple of the Jade Serpent 5-man, I believe that's what it's called. Go to that last boss, and even though you'll see people in sort of 540 gear upwards, they still are unable to dispel at the last boss. The healers just don't know about things like dispel. They've never had to deal with it. They don't know what to look for. They're not sure what happens on their raid frames when debuffs appear. And you'll see this all the time. Is it okay that we're now saying, yeah, you want to do this extra content? All you have to do is a proving ground. That's all you have to do. And hopefully that shit is going to be balanced pretty well. Alright, like we discussed earlier. It's an interesting idea. I'm not dead against it. It's certainly an inconvenience. There's no way of getting away from the fact that this is just a pain in the ass, because if you look at someone like me, let's say Warlords of Draenor is amazing. I go full force on my channel to make sure that Warlords of Draenor content is absolutely tip-top. Then I'm talking about sort of doing Proving Grounds on 10 odd characters. But even then, from that perspective, that's not that difficult. We're talking maybe 20 minutes per character. Depending on the leveling process, it might be a drop in the ocean compared to the long-term benefits. Especially if it means that we're actually going to get good, solid, heroic 5-man content again. I like the idea that the heroic 5-mans maybe are getting a bit more attention. There's not absolute focus on doing the crappy 3-man content. I'm not a big fan of it. I'm really not a huge fan of scenarios. I think they're a bit of a joke. And I like the idea that maybe, and this is of course a big maybe, that the 5-man content in Warlords of Draenor is, one, going to be a step up in challenge, going to be worth doing after the first week, which is always important, that you get the 5-mans and they're worth doing. And all this kind of stuff is coming, and the reason I think that is because we're gating it. We're gating it off. The big question is, will this make it to live? Will this make it to a month after release? We just don't know yet. We really don't know yet. But as for the people saying, this sucks, what a pain in the ass, I agree with you, but hopefully it's not too long of a pain in the ass, right? Hopefully it ain't that bad. Alright guys, let me hear your thoughts on this one. Let's have a discussion. I'll see you later. Bye.